Assalamualaikum and hi. My name is Intan Madiha binti Abdul Rahim. My metric number is CB210036. Today, I would like to talk about one measuring instrument which called angle gauge. The principle of angle gauge. The principle of an angle gauge is to measure the angle between two surface or object. The gauge is placed against the surfaces or object, and the angle is determined by reading the scale, which is used to measure angle in degrees. The rotating arm of the angle gauge can be adjusted to the angle you want to measure, and the scale can be read to determine the angle. The gauge consists of the flat base and the rotating arm with a scale that allow you to measure the angle. The angle gauge can measure in both either internal or external angle. Types of angle gauge. There are several types of angle gauge that have been used nowadays. It has different type of angle gauge that you can choose from depending on your specific needs. Some of the most common type include angle gauge block set, and digital angle gauge. Angle gauge are typically used to measure angle between 0 and 180 degrees, while digital angle gauge provide precise readout of angle up to 360 degrees. Method of using and determine the angle gauge. To determine the angle gauge, you need to measure the angle between two surfaces or objects. This can be done using an angle gauge. Here are the steps to follow. First, place the angle gauge on one of the surfaces or object you want to measure the angle between. Second, adjust the arm of the angle gauge until it is flush with the surface or object. Third, lock the arm in the place if your angle gauge has a locking mechanism. Fourth, place the angle gauge on the other surface or object you want to measure the angle between. Fifth, adjust the arm of the angle gauge until it is flush with the surface or object. Lastly, read the angle measurement on the digital display or scale of the angle gauge. Advantage of angle gauge. First, fast measurement of the angle between two surfaces in the engineering industry. Next, the angle gauge is more accurate than the sine bar because the sine bar involves a formula trigonometry. Next, the angle setting procedure with an angle measure is simpler than angle arrangement with a sine bar. Disadvantage of angle gauge. It can be difficult to use an angle gauge on a small or complex angle. Next, an angle gauge can be affected by change in temperature and humidity by leading to inaccurate measurement. Next, it's difficult to use an angle gauge in tight spaces or on uneven surfaces. For the use of angle gauge in industry. As we can see, carpenters use them to measure precisely to build doors, chairs, table, and others. Other than that, engineers construct buildings, bridge, houses, monument, and others using angle measurement. Next is factor that affecting calibration for angle gauge. First, temperature and humidity. Changes in temperature and humidity can cause the materials of the angle gauge to expand or contract, which can affect its accuracy. Second is rough handling. Dropping or mishandling the angle gauge can cause it is to become misaligned or damaged, which can affect its accuracy. Next is exposure to chemicals and solvents. Exposure to chemicals and solvents can cause the material of the angle gauge to degrade, which can affect its accuracy. Next is the frequency of calibration for angle gauge. The frequency of calibration for an angle gauge, it depends on how often it is used and the level of accuracy required for the specific application. In general, it is recommended to calibrate an angle gauge at least once a year to ensure accuracy and provide quantitative data to ensure you can provide quality assurance for your customers. However, if the gauge is used frequently or in harsh condition, it may to be calibrated more often. It is also important to calibrate the gauge if it is dropped or damaged, as this can affect its accuracy. Next, calibration should be performed by a qualified technician using a standard reference instrument. So, proper care and maintenance of the angle gauge can help to ensure its accuracy, and it is also can be reduced the need for frequent calibration. For the error involved in angle gauge, as we can see, the flatness of the surface seen by the angle gauge cause this factor to be large, contributing to measurement error and uncertainty. Next is alignment of the autocollimator's axis to the angle block side. The axis of measurement of the autocollimator must be aligned with the side of the angle block for proper measurement. If it is not, the autocollimator will be not be able to precisely calculate the angle. For the finish on the surface, scratches on the gauge surfaces of some autocollimators can cause error reading by diffusing the deflect light. In conclusion, an angle gauge is a tool used to measure angle accurately and efficiency. Also, it can be useful for a variety of application, including woodworking, metalworking, construction, and automotive repair, which is engineering field. Next is for the accuracy of the angle gauge. It depends on how they are designed, material, and calibration, as well as the skill of the user in aligning the gauge with the surfaces or object being measured. I think that's all from me for the information of the angle gauge. Thank you for watching. Assalamualaikum and bye.